Good evening, everybody. My name is Hassan, and I'm a member of the OFIS team. We're delighted to gather everyone together again for our last community talk for Our Future is Science. This series is a part of the Mentorship, Ambassador, and Champions program of Our Future is Science, and we are so happy to welcome the public as Zoom allows us to democratize these programs. OFIS is an initiative between the Aspen Institute Science and Society program, a nonpartisan organization, and we're committed to sparking curiosity, passion, and confidence about STEM in young people to push science forward in the 21st century and solve society's most pressing issues. We are generously supported by the Amgen Foundation, the Samueli Foundation, Burroughs Wellcome Fund, 3M, the Carson Family Charitable Trust. Without these funders, none of this would be possible. Thank you very much. The Community Talk series is a platform to expose individuals to diverse careers, as well as information, insights, and perspectives of the intersection of STEM disciplines and social justice issues. The Community Talk series will be ending after this one. So everybody, we will have time after our presentation for Q&A. Please don't hesitate to put your questions in the chat. And I'll turn it over to Victoria, one of our OFIS ambassadors, who will introduce tonight's speaker.
Good evening, everyone. I'm very excited to introduce tonight's speaker. Dr. Rashida Crutchfield is a professor in the School of Social Work at California State University, Long Beach. She's also the executive director of the Center for Equitable Higher Education, which is dedicated to studying and promoting economic, food, and housing justice. Dr. Crutchfield is committed to amplifying the voices of students through research and service. She has also presented widely and authored articles and reports and books about student basic needs. Rashida has provided input on state policy and support and advice to stakeholders across the state and nation who wish to replicate and expand policy and practice for students. Tonight, Rashida will talk about economic justice. What does food security and homelessness mean in terms of higher education?
Thank you so much, Victoria, and thank you all for being here this evening. It's just such a pleasure to be here with you in this virtual space. I know if it was if I was on the East Coast, it'd be 8 o'clock and I'd already be in my jammies. So I very much appreciate your attention and being here. I know there's going to be Q&A at the end, but if you get an urgent need to ask a question, please do. And I'm going to try open some space for us to talk to each other for sure. I'm a little under the weather, so bear with me a little bit. And yeah, so the other thing I want to say before I get started is that we are going to talk about food security and homelessness. And sometimes when we talk about these social issues, people talk about them as if they're outside of us. And it's quite possible that any one of us could be experiencing any of these issues. So I want us to all, I come from a place of understanding that any of us could be experiencing these issues now, in the past, or in the future. And so we need to take care of ourselves and each other as things might be coming up for us. I'm going to share my screen. Everybody still good? That's just the one screen. Give me a thumbs up. All right. So here, we're all in lots of different places, but here where I sit, it's important for me to do a land acknowledgement and really acknowledge that I'm sitting and benefiting from land that was originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, Tatuvan, Serrano, Kich, and Chumash people. We honor and pay respect to their elders and descendants, past, present, and emerging, as they continue their stewardship of these lands and waters. I also acknowledge that settler colonization resulted in land seizure, disease, subjugation, slavery, reallocation, broken promises, genocide, and multi-generational trauma. And frankly, many of us are experiencing multi-generational trauma right now. This acknowledgement demonstrates our responsibility and commitment to the truth, healing, and reconciliation and to elevating the stories, culture, and communities of the original inhabitants of this land. I'm going to talk to you probably more than you ever wanted to know about me, a bit about our work at the Center for Equitable Higher Education, or CHE, and about food and housing and how that influences the experience of folks in higher ed. I, as Victoria mentioned, am executive director for CHE, and we're a research center with a mission to ensure that California higher education really prioritizes students in their whole well-being. That education isn't just what happens inside the classroom, but I am a person inside that classroom and outside. And all of that matters as I'm trying to learn and proceed to graduation. So we work really hard to amplify the voices of students and the people who serve them as the experts of their experience, to build evidence through research to ensure that practitioners, policymakers, and leaders really know how to get students' basic needs met. So that's CHE, that's the context. But I'm gonna back up a little bit and tell you about me. So I'm this little kid right here, in my grandma's lap. I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to my two parents, these two folks with those massive afros, for which I am incredibly jealous. And my journey starts there because I'm rooted in my experience with my family. Both of my grandmothers worked in other people's houses and taught their families to serve others for a variety of reasons. It wasn't, serving others wasn't just about work or just about volunteerism. It was integral to who they were, and therefore it's integral into who I am. Now I have this is my my mother's family on the left, and my father and his brothers and one of his brother's ex-wives. Well, I wasn't born with biological siblings, but every time my parents get married, I get new siblings. But that I will leave for another day's story. I moved every 2 years growing up. My father was a journalist, and so when he got a new gig, we moved to a new place. And my mother was a school teacher, and both of them were really committed to service. So my dad was in college in journalism school and was pulled out of journalism school because at the time there were zero, count them, zero Black journalists in Pittsburgh. And so the Pittsburgh Press decided they would go find them some Black folks, and they found my dad was one of those folks. And so he came out and became a journalist, and he wrote and then edited and then was a publisher. And my mother taught school. She was a school teacher, and her focus was what they called business subjects. So when she first started, she was teaching students how to type and what you all would think is hieroglyphics, but was shorthand, which was something we used to do so people could write fast. When she retired, she was teaching website management and business administration. But they were both really focused in on how do I use my work to serve? And that definitely is a part of why I am who I am today. In the late 1900s, I graduated from California State University, Long Beach. And while I was there, I worked at the Isabel Patterson Child Development Center. And this also was foundational to the rest of my career. I have this picture here because I worked in the center and I worked with 2.5-year-olds. And when I was a child, when I would have been this age, if I was our child on the left in the pink shirt, and another baby was reaching for something that I had, my parents might, okay, so let me ask you, if two children, and this might be a generational question, so your responses might be different than my experience, but if you saw two children who were about 3 or so, How would your elders speak to them? What would they say if one child was grabbing a ball from another child? What might they say? So I'm asking you, you can unmute. If one child is grabbing a ball from another child, what might be some of the things adults say to those children? Anyone? I teach school, so I can wait.
I've been babysitting a bit recently, and the thing that their parents usually try to do is talk to them and say this isn't okay to do. The effectiveness is, hit or miss, but try to say like that's not okay. Let's give it back to the other person. Let's go find something else to play with.
I hear all of that. Thank you. What I'm seeing in the chat is what I would have heard too. Well, I would have probably heard stop that. And I think generationally, some of us have learned that that's not what you say, but I think lots of people still hear quit it, cut it out, put it down, stop that. But the other thing that parents often say is share. And that's what I'm seeing in the chat too. Or let's do something else. I don't remember, I didn't see who was talking, but yeah, that kind of thing. Like it's time to share. And I remember when I was with my nieces and one niece had grabbed something from the other and her mom said share. The older one said, when you say share, that means she gets it. And I was like, oh, damn. That is often what happens, right? Sometimes if you like one kid more, or sometimes it can be really gendered. So it seems like if a male presenting child is taking something from a female presenting child, you might take it and take sides somehow or distract them. Well, when I started working at the Isabel Patterson Child Development Center, they rocked my world and taught me to get down to the level of the children so I wasn't looming over them, and to say, it looks like there's a problem. It looks like you both want the ball. How can we solve this problem? Now, for 3-year-olds, 2.5 and 3-year-olds, often they just cry, or they might take a swing at somebody else. And my response typically before training would have been like, no, don't, be nice. But at the Child Development Center, they taught me to stop the harm, to make sure that everyone was safe, and say, hitting is not a way to get what you want. It can be, but I'm just saying, that's what you teach children, is hitting is not a way to get what you want. You can use your words. And I might, at this age, because they're so small, might say, you can say, I want it. And they might say, want. And another child might cry. And I might say, it looks like you're sad. You can say, I'm sad. And they might say, sad. Now, there would be a lot of negotiation. And frankly, that takes a lot of work and a lot of time. And usually we want to solve problems much faster than that. But from this training, it really grounds where I am right now, which is to help me understand that even these children, I'd be there and 6 months later, you'd see 3-year-olds going, I want that. And another one saying, I have it right now, but you can have it in 5 minutes. Teacher, tell us when it's 5 minutes. And they'd be problem solving better than the legislators in our federal government right now. And that really impressed me, both because these children then learned this communication, but also this is applicable to lots of people, and it's applicable to social problems. It's making sure that the people who are experiencing the problems get to define those problems and find those answers. And that roots me in how I approach my work. What I'll say also, though, about my journey is that often people around me can be very visionary. So when I was in high school, it seemed like everybody knew exactly where they wanted to go and what they wanted to major in. And when I was graduating from college, it was the same thing. But I've never been that person, really. I often had some ideas about what I wanted, but often I would experience great anxiety at pivots or divergence in the road in front of me. And so it was often really, it's still sometimes really hard for me when I'm not sure what my next step is. But what I've learned at my ancient age now, and you can't tell how old I am because I'm Black, but I'm older than one might think, is that what I want to do is open as many doors and windows as I can, walk through as many of those opportunities, and learn as much as I can from every opportunity that's presented in front of me. So that said, coming out of college, I did a bunch of jobs. I worked at an organization called the California Conference for Equality and Justice that does work that we now call DEI work. But we called it human relations back then. So I took youth to camp, and we talked about racism and classism and all of the ways that folks are intersectionally marginalized and what we needed to do about it. I went to the Brown School of Social Work at Washington University and earned my Master's of Social Work degree. And during that time, I did lobbying with Promo. I worked with the Biko Center in Brooklyn, New York, and I also worked for the ACLU. Really important for me was that for a brief time, for about 6 months, I worked for an organization called You Think, and I was doing youth organizing at the time. And sorry, I messed up my screen here. And I didn't like that job. I decided I wanted to go somewhere, but I had no idea where I wanted to go. I knew it wasn't a good fit for me, but I wanted a new job, but I wanted sort of a holding place. I wanted to be in this job for just about a year till I figured out what would be next. And frankly, usually when I'm at those crossroads and I don't know what I'm going to do, I usually go get a degree. I don't know what I'm going to do now because I'm done getting degrees, but I was thinking about what would be next. And I ended up doing an interview at Covenant House, California. Covenant House is a national organization that started in New York that serves youth who are experiencing homelessness. It's a shelter. And I did an interview there, and I really loved it. I really loved it. When I went there, I thought, you know, when I applied for the job, I thought, I'm not sure I want to go to a shelter. It must be a place that I had some stereotypes and thought it might be a scary place to work. But I went there and it was an amazing place. And I knew immediately that I would love it and I would love the youth that were there. And I told them, though, when they offered me the job, that I really only wanted, I was really transparent with them. And I said, I want a job for maybe a year. And I know that if I work here, I'm going to be connected to these youth. And I don't think it's fair to make connections with folks who are dealing with trauma and then leave. And they said, honestly, in this day and age, if you can give us a year, that's a great commitment. And so I did commit a year, and I ended up staying there for 3.5 years because I did love it. One of the youth that I met there, and I'll call her Keisha, that's not her name, but you don't need that, was going to a community college in the area. And so she was living in the shelter with us and went to get her financial aid so she could get set up to start school in the fall. And she went to the financial aid office, and the financial aid administrator said, we need your tax forms for your parents. She was 19 years old, and she said, well, I'm not in touch with my parents. I'm homeless. And so I don't have their tax forms. And that financial aid administrator said, well, you don't look homeless. I bet you're just having a fight with your parents. You need to go talk to your parents, get your tax forms, but you're going to miss this first semester. So just come back later. She came back to the shelter, and we were, well, you're going to have to forgive my language for a while here now, but we were pissed. And there was a friend of mine who is and was the local nun at the shelter, Sister Margaret Farrell. And she found her inner Black woman. Well, actually, she found her inner Irish woman because she was an Irish nun. And she went up to that financial aid office and let them have it. Let them have it. And so they let the student in and identified that she would be identified as an independent student, meaning that she did not need to provide the tax forms for her parents. And I thought, well, this was pretty amazing that Sister Margaret did this, but what do other students do who don't have an angry Irish nun to go rock the house for them? And so I was really curious. And so when I left Covenant House, I started working as staff on the campus of California University, Long Beach. So my life sort of came full circle there. And I was also doing my doctoral degree. And I decided to do my dissertation on homelessness amongst college students, to sort of explore this. And I was trying to explore the literature, as one should do when one starts a study, and I couldn't find anything on homelessness in higher education. There was a little bit of work on homelessness in K-12 education, but not in higher ed. And so I reached out to a bunch of people, and I reached out to a woman named Barbara Duffield at Schoolhouse Connect and said, Barbara, you're doing all this advocacy around K-12 homelessness and a little bit on college students. Where is the information? Because I'm doing lit searches and I'm wondering, I had imposter syndrome. So I thought I must be doing something wrong, that I can't find this information. And she said, actually, no, there is no information. That's your job now. And so it's been my job ever since. And so I, in my role as an academic, but also in leadership for the Center for Equitable Higher Education, study basic needs in security. And when I say basic needs, and sometimes people call them essential needs, I'm talking about the conditions necessary for students to survive and thrive. And most often when we're talking about basic needs in higher ed, we're talking about housing and food, but we also are talking about needs that we must have to do well in school. And that's inclusive of having a computer, having care for my mental and physical health, having financial well-being, having housing supplies, transportation, and for many students, that's childcare. Tonight, I'm going to focus a bit on homelessness and hunger, but I want us to, be expansive in our thinking. So I want to level set a little bit and make sure we all understand what we're talking about when we're talking about homelessness, because just like that financial aid administrator who was probably thinking about someone who she might have seen on the street, homelessness looks like a lot of different things. What we're talking about broadly is a lack of fixed, regular, and adequate place to stay. And in some cases, we do have plenty of students who are street living. I have talked to students who are living in shelters, who are living in benches, who are living, I've done data collection in rural communities, so students who are living in barns, in tents, but most often students are moving from place to place. Or what we call couch surfing or dorm surfing. And I think it's really important to hear from students themselves. So I like to bring in their voices because I can't manage to keep students in my pocket all the time for when I speak. So here are students.
Friends' couches, a couple nights in my car. Thankfully, it was warm enough to where I'm not freezing to death in the... But when I stayed at a certain friend's house and her roommate was kind of getting annoyed that I was there, I didn't want to overstay my welcome. And I had left that day before showering, and so it really hit me like I don't have a place to shower. Something I would never want to wish upon anybody to go through.
So, experiencing homelessness is a traumatic event, and it often influences every part of someone's life. So I interviewed a student that I would call Haley, and she would say in her community, they say a dead cat starts to smell after 3 days. So it meant that she didn't want to stay in one place for too long because it starts to break apart her relationships as well, because people get tired, they get empathy fatigue. And so sometimes it also impacts this experience permeates all sorts of places in their experience. So we also talk about food security. High food security or marginal food security. So I have high food security. I have food in my refrigerator. I don't worry about where my next meal is going to come from. Marginal food security might be associated with anxiety around food, but generally food access is available to me. When we're talking about being food insecure, we're talking about these lower two bars. So low food security or very low food security. So that's not necessary. I don't have to be hungry to be low food insecure. So I've talked to students. I talked to one student who would eat a bag of apples every day. And he would say, I'm never hungry. I'm always full, but I'm not healthy. That's low food security. Very low food security means skipping meals regularly because of not having, in both cases, because not having enough money to purchase food. This is Susan.
I would get bananas and I will cut it in half. I'd eat only half in the morning and then I would wait 5 hours, then eat the other half, just so I have something in my stomach consistently. I would struggle to concentrate for sure, but because that's all I could think about was where my next meal was going to come from.
So these are numbers for California. We have 3 higher education segments in California, the UCs, the University of California, so UCLA and Cal and 8 other institutions. The California State University has 23 institutions all across the state of California, and there are 116 California community colleges. And the rates for food insecurity across all of us are about 40%, although in the community colleges, their rates tend to be higher. And then in terms of homelessness, we all range about 10 or 11%, although again, in the community colleges, it's much higher at almost a quarter of their students. Recent study of nationally mirror this. So across the country, about 40% of students are experiencing food insecurity and about 10% are experiencing homelessness every year. So we don't do research for research's sake. It's funny, I mentioned earlier that my dad was a journalist, so he wrote, and my mom was a teacher, and I decided early on as a child that I was definitely not going to be a teacher and I was not going to be a writer. And now that is exactly what I am. So there's that planning. But when I left practicing, well, I still practice social work because what I do is what we would call macro social work. But when I left activism or organizing, I knew that if I was going to go and turn to the dark side and go into academia, that I wanted to do research that mattered, that didn't just sit on a shelf, but that changed policy and practice. And so that's my goal. And so the research that we've done to understand the experience of students and evaluate whether or not the programs and services developed to support them and policies to support them, we know that we want all that to matter. So we've made sure to provide research so that students really can be activists. So there are a lot of people who've done policy advocacy to develop policies and develop programs to meet students' basic needs, but really it's because students chose to be active and chose to hold all of our administrators and our institutions accountable for their basic needs, and also really be active with policymakers, that we now have policy and millions of dollars pointed to the basic needs of students here in California, and that's also true in a variety of places across the country. So yeah, there's that. I'm watching my time here. I haven't forgotten. So the state of California used our research and some of the research of a small community of researchers, and then those advocates went to policy and then pushed for policy. So we have seen lots of changes because of that's grounded in research. Here in this picture, one of the things that we advocated for, so this is me and a group of students, social work students. We all did lobby days with the National Association of Social Workers. So 1,100 social workers went to the capital of California to lobby for a few bills, but one of those bills was to fund college-focused rapid rehousing, which developed programs and services to address homelessness in California. And that bill passed. I'm going to talk a little bit in a second about what that looks like. Yeah, so in the CSU, which has 23 campuses, now all of our campuses have basic needs programs. And in 2015, that was not true. No campuses had basic needs programs. Many campuses across the country had food pantries, and those food pantries have expanded. But now all of our campuses, all of our community colleges, all of our UCs, and all of our CSUs have basic needs centers. And a basic needs center looks different from campus to campus, but often it means it has people who are there as case managers to help make sure that they refer students to a variety of services that can support their basic needs. They often have clothing closets, food pantries, financial empowerment work, and linkages to benefits like SNAP, or what folks colloquially will call food stamps. One of the things that often is harder to do is make sure that people have housing. And there's lots of reasons why people are reticent to address housing for students. But one of the major initiatives that I mentioned already was college-focused rapid rehousing. So college campuses work in collaboration with community-based partners, housing agencies. And so on the college campus, a student identifies themselves to a basic needs center that they're experiencing homelessness. And then we work with the CBO to then subsidize a student in housing, and then they get support services while they're in housing towards graduation. The California State University has invested $19 million annually since 2020 towards this effort. And we all do all this once again because students need it in order to achieve. So let's hear from them again.
Saving money for my kids so they don't have to go through this. Unfortunately, I can't change anything about my situation, but hopefully I can change the pattern for the future.
And here's Tom taking us home.
I strongly believe that education is the greatest investment that the society can put upon itself. An investment in us, which is the future, which is the next generation, is the most rewarding for an economy, for research, for science, for literature, for culture, the arts, and for any budget cuts to be coming towards us will dramatically affect us. They affect our health, they affect our future, they affect our progression out of poverty.
I should just let him talk for me. So I started with my family, and I'm going to end with my family. My cousin, Alicia Wormsley, is a really quite successful artist. And so this is the piece that she did. And these are matriarchs in my family. My family likes to sing. If we're in the house all together, we sing. If we're all in the kitchen, we're singing. If we're in the car, we're singing. If someone wants something from upstairs, we're probably yelling. But we are singing folks, and I am absolutely not going to sing today. But what I do want to end with is that I really liken work like this to being in a choir, because it isn't work that can be done by yourself. Absolutely, there are soloists who do beautiful things, but a really successful choir means that all of us are singing together. And if one of us stumbles or is tired because this work is hard, then someone else can sing a little louder and someone else can take a deep breath. And it's through that work together to make sure that people get what they need that we create a beautiful song. It's been my pleasure to speak with you or speak at you for a little while. And I encourage you to follow us on your socials, and happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Crutchfield, for laying the foundation on how research can be used for action in legislation and direct practice. I really enjoyed your overview of kind of your trajectory and your career and your path and how it led you to kind of where you are today. And also giving us those clear definitions of what basic needs actually means and homelessness means for us to get a better understanding of ourselves. I think I really like the food insecurity model that you showed, because I think that a lot of people just, I know when I think about it, it's like either the like, very secured, or low, not thinking about that middle aspect of it. Like you were stating, that individual eating those apples and just not getting the nutrition that they need, but they're full. And a lot of times we don't think about that as being food insecure. So I really liked your talk today. Thank you so much for giving us an overview on that and giving us a more foundational knowledge of those concepts. And I'm just impressed by your efforts to like influence policy with the work that you're doing, and getting like actionable steps for that. So now we are opening it up to now we're opening it up to questions. If anyone has questions, I think Sophia has a question. Actually, I'm going to start at the top.
I see Araceli, and I might have
Yes.
missed someone, but Araceli, I appreciate your question about me. So moving, I was sort of like a military kid in that moving so often. And honestly, I didn't know any different. And so that meant that I had to learn how to make friends pretty quickly. And I feel like I do that. My friends will say I collect people. So I have this way of going, and I did this with Hassan when we first met. We're friends now. Without your permission, I've just told you we're friends now. So I do that quite a lot. And I feel like we got some new friends here in this space as well. And I just didn't know any different. But so it sort of came together. And then your second question so Araceli, you asked about the organization. And so it depends on who you're talking about. Are you there? Is Araceli there? You want to clarify your question? I'm trying to find your box.
Yeah, I was just asking about, like, since the organization offers security to people who identify themselves to be homeless, what, other than like shelter and like financial support for that matter, does the organization also support like college tuition and like give grants for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So college-focused rapid rehousing is a program that actually appears on lots of campuses. So we have 18 institutions in the CSU that all have like this college-focused rapid rehousing program as a part of their basic needs efforts, right? And so if a student becomes a part of, and this also happens actually at community colleges too, in California. And so generally speaking, and I'm going to speak in generalizations and not specifics, because there's definitely specific things for specific people. But generally speaking, if someone is experiencing homelessness, their threshold for income allows them to get Pell, such that in the state of California, their tuition is often covered. Now, tuition is lower here in California for residents than what I experienced, because when I first went to college, I started in Michigan. I was living in Detroit, and tuition, when I moved to California, became a resident, got lower, even though the cost of living in California is ridiculous. But tuition was lower. So if I was experiencing homelessness in California and I had basically no income and was experiencing homelessness, my tuition would probably be covered. The problem is everything else, right? Like living costs money. The real cost of college is much bigger than tuition. So the program funds then their housing, or it subsidizes their housing. So sometimes it funds all of the cost of housing, and sometimes it does part of the housing, and then the student works to cover the rest of it. And then they have to work. So for students, often they're working also quite a lot in order to compensate for other expenses. And that's something still for us to be working on. I hope that answered your question. Sophia, I see you.
Sophia, you can go ahead and speak. You can unmute to ask your question if you'd like. You're still muted. Okay, we'll wait.
Okay. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, awesome. I just wanted to say I absolutely loved your talk. It was so inspiring to see a movement that helps address such a widespread issue, especially in a lot of our communities. And I wanted to ask, as I'm a really big advocate for student voice and action and a lot of issues that happen in their community, I wanted to ask, what do you believe high school students and younger students today can do to help the initiative of lessening homelessness, whether it be, doing food drives, whether it be any other thing to help with increasing food security. What do you think we can do in our own communities with the resources we have available at our disposal and everything?
Another great question. Sophia, and I know you're in California. Where are you?
Yeah, so I'm in like the LA, like kind of LA location. Yeah.
You know, we should hang out. Okay. So in high school, there's so many things that you can do, and there's so many people who are doing lots of things. So for me, like, I was a community organizer, right? So that means basically doing what I was doing with small children, with all kinds of people, which is to ask a group of folks, what are you experiencing? What do you see are the problems, and what do you see are the solutions, and help to navigate getting at some of those solutions. So a lot of us right now are on the struggle bus trying to figure out how to survive in the context that we have. I think, particular to this issue, I think often the first thing is to find folks who are in the movement right now, which is why I'm saying we should hang out. Like, so connect to someone. Often folks feel like they have to Columbus things, which is to, like, think they're doing something new, even though people are already living here, So, like, I think the first thing you do is say, who's doing what, right? And in our area, there are definitely food pantries available. Sometimes, frankly, in our K-12 situations, a lot of us in the LA area, it's sort of a given, like, everybody in the school gets free or reduced lunch, or most people get free or reduced lunch. But that doesn't necessarily help our families. And so, but because of the way food services is structured in our high schools, your high school might be saying, no, you can't have a food pantry because that competes with our contract with your institution. And if you work with them and are transparent with them, you can say, what we're doing is giving folks food for their families. This doesn't actually infringe on what you're doing. Maybe we start a food pantry for folks so that they can take things home. You can also, in terms of higher ed, you can get in touch with your local basic needs organizations. Often our basic needs programs, particularly our campus food pantries, are run by students. And so there are lots of opportunities, both where you are in high school and also where you're going in college. So that's just a start. There's lots of things to do, but that's just a start of something to think about.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
Any other questions? Okay, I'll go ahead and ask a question that I have. In that same realm, what advice would you have to those interested in getting legislation like that in their state, right? Because you all were able to get that policy passed. So what advice would you give for us in wanting to move the needle in that same way?
I love that question. So there are a bunch of folks that folks should get in touch with. And actually, this goes back to Sophia too. Swipe Out Hunger is an organization that does advocacy and lobbying and all kind of good work, but they also do practice. So they work with food pantries and stuff locally as well. And they're a national organization that folks could get in touch with. There's lots of work that they do. And then Young Invincibles is also an organization that does advocacy, and they are students. I mean, they definitely have staff who are not students, but they do incredible work that is focused in for youth, by youth, and they are national as well. So there's a longer list here, but I think for me, like I think I grew up believing that, people who were in policy, they may have varying access to their well of intelligence, but that they did have some aptitude for leadership. And my first gig, so my first internship in my Master's of Social Work program, as I mentioned before, was as a lobbyist. And I was doing gay rights lobbying in St. Louis in 2001. And I had never identified as queer at that point. And so I learned a lot. And I remember going to sit in front of a legislator. And at the time in Missouri, it was illegal to have homosexual sex at all. If you got caught having homosexual sex, you were committing a sexual offense. And so you went on the sex offender list just like someone who had attacked someone and assaulted someone. It was the same list. And so we were advocating to make that not happen. And I remember sitting in front of a legislator basically saying, we just want to pull the LGBTQIA family off the list of sexual offenders. And she said, yeah, I can see that, but I was watching TV the other day, and on TV there was this character who was trans, and it was negatively impacting somebody's business, and I don't want that to happen. And so I'm not sure I can support this. And I just sat back in my seat and thought, you are watching TV and you're going to build policy based on that sitcom from Thursday night. And I was so mad. I was so mad. And I realized that these people, now you all know this now, like in the cluster of what we are living right now, it's clearer to us that these people are just people. But I think, up to that point, I had this deference for legislators that, they are decision makers, so you have to come to them in a certain kind of way to get what you want. And protesting is one way to do that. But activism comes in a toolbox with many tools. And sometimes you use a hammer, but sometimes you use tape. And sometimes you use sticky, glue, right? Like you can't use the hammer for every tool. And so lobbying is one way. Like you can connect with other groups. So often lots of groups have, lobby days. So like, our students do the National Association of Social Worker lobby days. And we, organize ourselves, we educate ourselves, we make legislative appointments, we sit in front of legislators, and we make our ask. And I did that when I was working with You Think. I did that with children who were in middle school. We developed lobby days, and we took our students who were anywhere from 10 to 13, made legislative appointments, and made our pitches. So if you want to be involved in policy, that's one way to do it. But you can also be involved in policy in lots of different ways. Again, lots of tools in the toolbox. So you can be connected to folks who develop information You can be connected to folks who, do campaigns on social media. There's lots of different ways to get involved in the legislative process. And now is quite a time to do it.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other questions?
I have a quick question. I was wondering, so you said earlier that when you were going into academia, you wanted to make sure that your research, like had a purpose. It wasn't just going to sit on a shelf. Do you have how did you go about making sure that it was, going to be used? Or like what advice would you have to somebody who was hoping to go in to do that?
Yeah, Tess, thank you for that question. And that's a good one. I'm thinking on my feet right now because I think one of the things for me was that I had to choose what I was studying. Sometimes we study because we're really interested in investigating something and to enrich our own mind and understanding. And I think that that's important too, right? Like, I think, you know, um, being a part of research that is about curiosity is important. So I don't want to discourage that. But sometimes for me, it's about what questions am I asking and thinking about then if I get the answers, what will that mean? Like, what is the outcome? And if someone has the information I'm trying to find, what would they do with it? And that might be related to medicine and, you know, or it might mean, civic engineering. It could be anything, but it's about, for me, thinking about what is the question, and if I get the answer, where does that go? What's next? Maybe that was too loose, but does that help, Tess?
It does. Thank you so much. And thank you for your talk. It was wonderful. So
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Crutchfield. I'm going to turn it over now to Ebony.
Thank you. So this has been an incredibly important talk, and we are super grateful to Dr. Rashida Crutchfield for spending this evening with us. And to our audience, you can extend your appreciation to our speaker in the chat. And thank you all for attending this community talk. Dr. Crutchfield will be joining the ambassadors for a deep dive on Tuesday, April 15th from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern. Please send OFIS or Hassan a quick email if you would like the link to attend to register for the deep dive. Also, please visit our website, ourfutureisscience.org, and follow us on social media to learn about our initiative, future events, and our educational campaign. So good night, everyone. But mentees and mentors, don't log off yet. We have a few minutes devoted to you for you to ask some questions. And don't forget to complete the attendance form in the chat. Thank you so much.
And
Thank you,
for
Rashida.
when you're not feeling so well.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.